Let's talk BBC. And now, on the good side, I think the BBC can produce some good dramas. However, they seem to be spending more time these days being the drama. So, Ofcom have done a survey, and in this survey, shock horror, it found that lots of people, defined as working class, think that basically they're patronising, that they're politically correct. They've dumbed down comedy to the point where it's probably not comedy. Who'd have thought, hey? I don't know what is wrong with the BBC. It was a fantastic institution, and it's a shame to see it just being confirmed, how it is losing touch with its audience. Rebecca Ryan joins me. Hello.
Hi there, Nick.
How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you.
Excellent. Right, thank you for joining me. So, I mean, I've got to say, you wouldn't have been surprised by this survey, would you?
No, I mean, we could have saved a lot of money for Ofcom if they'd actually just looked at the polling and the research and all of the data that's been out there. It's not surprising at all. But obviously, it's good to see that the data is, played out also, for Ofcom and as an official body, that they're reporting the same thing as what we're seeing. It's absolutely the case that working class people do not feel that the BBC represents them. And that's been building and building for a number of years.
I mean, I'd go further, Becca. Yeah. Okay, maybe it's just me, but I've sat at the BBC and I said I've had enough of this. I really have. I think their point, for example, is that even in drama, which I think they've always historically been pretty good, is people are saying now that the programmes that they're putting out are effectively woke-led programmes, and they don't find any pleasure in it. Now, the idea that every working class person is politically active, thinks about woke or stuff like this is just nonsense. They're just watching a station and they're kind of saying, I don't find this entertainment anymore.
Exactly. The BBC is in the business now of preaching to people. It's sort of trying to do this social engineering where it's trying to sort of say, this is what you should be thinking. We're aware that it's not really what you are thinking, but if we keep pushing this out at you, maybe, it will sink in. And that's very patronising. And it's also deeply uncomfortable for people who are being forced to pay for a TV licence. And then they just want to be entertained. And then what they're getting is this, this sort of wokeism shoved down their throats, whether it's on Country File, they're looking to watch a programme about sort of farming in the countryside, and then you've got some sort of woke angle coming in, or even EastEnders. They shoehorn it into everything, don't they? And it's just exhausting for people.
So I think there were two things that struck me about this. The regulator, which we're talking about, Ofcom, it carried out the survey from working class and lower income households, right? So we are talking blue-collar working households, I presume, particularly, right? Backbone of the nation in many ways. And they became concerned that only 55% of them have a positive opinion of the BBC. Basically, 45% don't in Ofcom surveys. Then they say, but that's compared to 67% of middle-class professionals. That's still 1/3 of the people that they're meant to be broadcasting to in so-called middle class. It's not doing the job. At what point do we say, as funders of the BBC, enough is enough?
Yeah, I mean, I think we are reaching that point. It's sort of the last days of Rome here, isn't it? Where they're sort of tinkering around with the deck chairs on the Titanic. They're trying to sort of tick all these boxes. And at the end of the day, they've lost sight of what it is that they're meant to be doing, which is entertaining and informing, and they're not delivering on either of those things. As you said earlier, they're sort of stumbling in from one disaster to the next. They are the drama rather than creating drama that people want to watch. So I think the thing is that there is this sort of tsunami coming for the BBC, where you've got young people who just don't consume TV in that way anymore. They watch on demand mainly. Therefore, the TV license is just of no value to them. They can't get enough value out of it if they're not watching live broadcast TV. So young people aren't sort of signing up for a TV licence when they leave home. And then obviously the elderly are getting more and more turned off by this wokeism.
Well, that's true. That is the audience which is dropping. But let me ask you this. As a public sector broadcaster, effectively, I understood the argument decades ago, which sort of said, well, Radio 3 is going to play classical arts music, which would never have stood up on its own classic commercially, because there wasn't enough money to pay it. So you know that's why they existed. They looked after other sectors that perhaps the private sector wouldn't have done. And then we had the popular BBC One and so forth. Well, is there a role in the modern digital age and world for a public sector broadcaster?
I mean, I think it's a very it's almost a very patronising middle class view, isn't it? That sort of these people need to have this content because it's culturally correct for them to have it and experience it. But actually, who's listening to this and who's watching it? And actually, you'll find on YouTube now, I don't know if you watch much content on YouTube, I watch a lot on YouTube. There is a whole raft, you know, the democratization of entertainment content on YouTube is amazing, where you will see, you know, classical music and you will see all of these different things. And it's being produced and monetized in a way that works for everybody.
You see, now that sorry to speak over you, that's my point, because decades ago, we literally had 3 or 4 channels and the radio. And I got that argument then, and I suppose I wasn't trying to put it forward as a patronising point of view. I just knew there was a market there for, but it was not enough to stack up commercially for someone to broadcast classic FM or whatever it was to become in the end. And that gets to the point. If you've got this digital landscape, surely the only thing that justifies keeping a public funder at the moment, and I'm not sure the numbers would add up, is the fact that not everyone is tuned into the digital landscape, particularly older generations.
Exactly. And these are the people, and this is the tragedy, is that these are the people who are not being represented by the BBC. And we look at sort of box ticking and all of those things that the BBC is sort of bending over backwards to try and achieve. But the people they're excluding from that are older people, and they're the people that they're taking for granted, who are generally still paying for TV licenses because they might not have sort of unlimited broadband. You know, once everybody's got unlimited broadband, there is no reason whatsoever to have live broadcast TV anymore.
No, that's true. But it's also your willingness to use it. I mean, you know, I some elderly relatives of mine, my wife's parents, you know, I remember the painful lessons trying to sort of use the iPad and so forth. Not everyone is averse with it. So is this a generational thing? Is it going to be there for 10 years, 15 years, as older folk like me move on to other places, that we're going to start to see the BBC really dropping its audiences and the argument becoming so profound and strong that they shouldn't exist on public money? Absolutely, I think so. I mean, if you I don't know if you have young children or teenage children, but I've got them all.
they don't consume TV in that way, and it's sort of as they come up and as they grow older, and even myself, you know, I'm in my mid-40s, but I don't watch live broadcast TV anymore. Once you've switched over to that, you can't imagine really sitting and waiting for something to be shown to you.
No, it's very true. I think we watch the catch-up. And which you know you could watch anywhere. If I was to, since I'm in the mood for forecast today, how many years do you give the BBC before actually someone says we don't need you anymore?
I think the issue that we have is that it's a political hot potato, isn't it? And so
it's like the NHS in its own little way, isn't it?
It is. And even though we've had a Tory government with an 80-seat majority who people voted for thinking they were going to do quite radical things like shake up the civil service and do something about the BBC TV licence, they haven't. And so I think there's a lot of dissatisfaction out there, particularly with our supporters, that, you know, how is this going to be brought to an end? And the only way it really will be brought to the end, I don't think we can rely on politicians to do that, will be purely that people realise they don't need to pay for a TV licence if they're watching on-demand content.
Which is at the heart of your campaign. So go on, make that point again so people hear it.
Well, absolutely. You do not need to pay for a TV licence if you're only watching on-demand content, unless it's BBC iPlayer. So anything BBC, you need a TV licence for, but then anything live broadcast. So if you're only watching on-demand or catch-up content, you don't need a TV licence. Once people realise that, and obviously the BBC like to be a little bit cagey about that and put a sort of smoke screen around it, they don't want everybody to know, you don't have to have a TV licence.